phone call came at 2:30 a.m. on March 15th, 1965. Frank Sinatra was in his Palm Springs home when Dean Martin's shaking voice pierced through the darkness. "Frank, I need help. I'm in serious trouble, and I don't know who else to call." Dean Martin, the cool, unflappable king of cool who never seemed worried about anything, sounded terrified. In 30 years of friendship, Frank had never heard Dean's voice break like this. Something was very wrong. "Dino, where are you?" "Las Vegas." "Frank, I made some bad decisions. Really bad. And now, I think they're going to kill me." Frank was already reaching for his car keys. "Stay put. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming." What Frank discovered that night would test their friendship to its limits and force him to risk everything he'd built to save the man who'd been like a brother to him for decades. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. March 14th, 1965. The Riviera Casino, Las Vegas, 11 p.m. Dean Martin sat at the high-stakes poker table, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. The pile of chips in front of him had been growing steadily for 3 hours, then disappeared in 20 minutes of catastrophic hands. Dean was playing against Vincent "Vinny" Torino, a businessman who owned several legitimate enterprises, but was rumored to have other, less legal interests. Vinny had been charming all evening, buying drinks, telling stories, making Dean feel comfortable. Too comfortable. "One more hand, Dean," Vinny said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Double or nothing. You're up for it, right?" Dean should have walked away. He was already down $50,000, money he didn't have, money he'd borrowed against his upcoming film contracts. But Dean Martin had never backed down from a challenge, especially not in front of other men. "Deal the cards," Dean said. The hand was over in minutes. Dean's full house lost to Vinny's straight flush, a hand so unlikely that Dean realized too late that he'd been set up. "Tough luck, Dean," Vinny said, gathering the chips. "That brings your total debt to $200,000. Dean's blood ran cold. $200,000, more money than most people made in a lifetime. Money Dean didn't have and couldn't get. "Vinny, you know I'm good for it. Just give me a few weeks to—" Dean, Vinny interrupted. His voice still friendly, but with an edge that made Dean's stomach turn. "This isn't personal. It's business. And in my business, debts get paid promptly." Vinny stood up, straightening his expensive suit. "You've got 48 hours to get me my money. After that," he shrugged, "well, let's just say late payment penalties in my line of work are pretty severe." Dean watched Vinny walk away, surrounded by 3 large men who looked like they'd spent more time in gymnasiums than boardrooms. Dean Martin, the man who'd made millions of women swoon and millions of men laugh, was scared for his life. March 15th, 1965. 2 a.m. Dean's hotel suite. Dean had been pacing his Sands hotel suite for 3 hours, trying to figure out how to raise $200,000 in 48 hours. He'd called his agent, his lawyer, his business manager. Nobody had that kind of cash available on short notice. Worse, Dean was starting to understand that this wasn't just about money. Vinny Torino hadn't won $200,000 through luck. He'd orchestrated the entire evening to put Dean in debt. But why? What did Torino really want? The answer came with a knock on Dean's door at 2:15 a.m. "Room service," a voice called. Dean hadn't ordered room service, but he was too distracted to think clearly. He opened the door to find 2 of Torino's men standing in the hallway. "Mr. Martin," Mr. Torino would like to discuss your debt situation. It wasn't a request. Dean found himself in a limousine driving through the Nevada desert, flanked by Torino's associates. They pulled up to a remote warehouse 20 miles outside Las Vegas. Inside, Vinnie Torino was waiting with a proposition that made Dean's blood freeze. "Dean, I've been thinking about your situation," Torino said, settling into a chair across from Dean. "200,000 is a lot of money, but maybe we can work out a different arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "I need someone with your connections, your reputation, your access to certain people. Someone who can deliver messages, arrange meetings, provide information." Dean understood immediately. Torino wanted him to spy on his friends, particularly Frank Sinatra, who was rumored to have his own complicated relationships with various business interests. "I need details about Frank's business dealings, his travel schedule, his security arrangements. You provide that information, and we'll call your debt even." Dean felt sick. Torino wasn't just asking him to betray Frank. He was asking him to put Frank in danger. "And if I refuse?" Torino's smile disappeared. "Dean, you're a smart man. You understand how these things work." That's when Dean knew he had to call Frank. March 15th, 1965. 4 a.m. Frank's rescue mission. Frank drove through the desert toward Las Vegas at 90 miles per hour, his mind racing faster than his car. Dean's phone call had been brief but clear. He was in serious trouble, being held against his will, and needed Frank's help. Frank had made 2 stops before leaving Palm Springs. First, to his safe, where he'd withdrawn $250,000 in cash, money he kept for emergencies. Second, to Jilly Rizzo's house, where he'd picked up his most trusted friend and bodyguard. "You sure about this, Frank?" Jilly asked, as they raced through the darkness. "Walking into something like this without backup?" "Dino's like my brother," Frank replied. "You don't abandon family." But Frank wasn't walking in blind. During the drive, he'd made several phone calls to contacts in Las Vegas, people who owed him favors, people who understood the delicate balance of power in the city. By the time Frank reached Las Vegas, he knew exactly who Vincent Torino was, what he wanted, and how to get Dean back safely. March 15th, 1965. 6 a.m. The Confrontation. Frank walked into the Riviera Casino as if he owned the place. In many ways, he did. His performances drew millions of dollars in revenue to Las Vegas casinos, and his influence extended far beyond entertainment. Frank didn't go to the warehouse where Dean was being held. Instead, he went straight to Torino's legitimate business office on the Strip. "Tell Mr. Torino that Frank Sinatra is here to discuss Dean Martin's situation," Frank told the secretary. Within minutes, Frank was sitting across from Torino in a luxurious office overlooking the Strip. "Mr. Sinatra, what a pleasure. I heard you wanted to discuss your friend's gambling debt." Frank placed the briefcase containing $250,000 on Torino's desk. "There's Dean's debt, plus interest. Now let's talk about what you really want." Torino smiled. "You're very direct. I like that. But this isn't just about money anymore. Your friend insulted my business, questioned my integrity. That requires additional compensation." Frank leaned back in his chair, studying Torino carefully. "Vinny, can I call you Vinny? You seem like a reasonable businessman. So, let me explain something to you in business terms." Frank's voice remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "Dean Martin is my friend. He's also one of the biggest draws in Las Vegas entertainment. If something happens to Dean, it reflects badly on the city. Bad publicity hurts everyone's business." Frank paused, letting that sink in. More importantly, Dean has friends, important friends, friends who wouldn't appreciate hearing that someone had threatened him. Torino's confidence flickered slightly. Are you threatening me, Mr. Sinatra? I don't threaten people, Vinny. I explain consequences. If Dean doesn't walk out of wherever you're holding him in the next hour, completely unharmed, you're going to have problems you can't imagine. Frank stood up. Take the money, release Dean, and understand that this conversation never happened. That's good business for everyone. March 15th, 1965. 7 a.m. The reunion. Dean was released at a gas station on the outskirts of Las Vegas exactly 1 hour after Frank's meeting with Torino. Frank was waiting there, leaning against his car with a cigarette and a worried expression. When Dean climbed out of Torino's car, Frank could see that his friend had been shaken but not physically harmed. "You okay, Pally?" Frank asked, using his pet nickname for Dean. Dean nodded, though his hands were still trembling slightly. "I screwed up, Frank. Really screwed up. We'll talk about it later. Right now, let's get you home." During the drive back to Los Angeles, Dean told Frank the whole story. The rigged poker game, the impossible debt, Torino's demand that Dean spy on Frank. "He wanted me to betray you," Dean said quietly. "Set you up for something bad. I couldn't do it, Frank. I'd rather die than hurt you." Frank glanced at his friend, seeing the genuine anguish in Dean's eyes. "Dino, you don't have to explain anything to me. We're family. Family protects family. But the money, Frank, 250 grand. How am I going to pay you back?" Frank waved dismissively. "Forget about it. I'd spend 10 times that to keep you safe." March 16th, 1965. The aftermath. The next evening, Frank and Dean were back on stage together at the Sands, performing their usual routine as if nothing had happened. To the audience, they were the same cool, sophisticated entertainers they'd always been. But something had changed between them. The experience had deepened their friendship in a way that even decades of performing together hadn't accomplished. Dean had seen Frank risk everything to save him without hesitation. Frank had seen Dean choose loyalty over self-preservation, even when faced with death threats. After the show, they sat in Frank's dressing room, sharing a drink and processing what had happened. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Dean said. "I thought I could handle anything. I've been performing since I was a kid, dealt with tough crowds, difficult people. But when I was in that warehouse, all I could think about was that I might never see my kids again." Frank nodded. "Fear makes us human, Dino. The trick is not letting it make us stupid." "How do you do it, Frank? How do you always know what to do in situations like that?" Frank considered the question carefully. "You protect the people you love. Everything else is just details." 1995. The bond deepened. The incident with Torino was never discussed publicly, but it changed the dynamic of Frank and Dean's friendship forever. Dean became more careful about his gambling, more selective about the people he trusted. Frank became even more protective of his friend, always making sure Dean was safe when they traveled together. Their professional partnership flourished. The Rat Pack performances at the Copa Room became legendary, partly because the genuine affection between Frank and Dean was obvious to everyone watching. Dean often told friends that Frank had saved his life, though he never explained the details. Frank never mentioned the incident at all, considering it simply what any friend would do. December 25th, 1995. The final Christmas. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, at the age of 78. Frank, who was 80 and in declining health himself, was devastated by the loss. At Dean's funeral, Frank delivered a brief eulogy that revealed the depth of their friendship. Dean was more than a friend, more than a partner. He was my brother, in every way that mattered. We shared everything: success, failure, laughter, worry. And when he needed help, I was honored to be the person he called. Frank paused, his voice breaking slightly. 30 years ago, Dean taught me something important. He showed me that real friendship isn't about the good times. It's about being there for each other when everything goes wrong. Dean was there for me more times than I can count, and I hope I was there for him when it mattered most. Frank never spoke publicly about the incident with Torino, but close friends knew it had defined his relationship with Dean. It was the moment when their entertainment partnership became a genuine brotherhood, May 14th, 1998. Frank's final word. When Frank Sinatra died in 1998, just 3 years after Dean, many of his friends recalled the bond between the two men. Sammy Davis Jr., who had died in 1990, had once said, "Frank and Dean loved each other like real brothers. They fought sometimes, they disagreed, but they'd die for each other. That's something you don't see much anymore." The story of Frank's rescue of Dean Martin remained largely unknown until years later, when details emerged through interviews with Jilly Rizzo and other members of Frank's inner circle. It became a testament to the kind of loyalty that defined Frank Sinatra's character, not just his willingness to help a friend in trouble, but his refusal to consider any alternative. When Dean called for help, Frank didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risks, didn't worry about the cost. He simply did what needed to be done. Today, when people remember the Rat Pack, they often focus on the glamour, the performances, the legendary parties. But the real story of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin is simpler and more profound. It's the story of two men who understood that friendship means being willing to risk everything for the people you love. In a world where celebrity relationships are often superficial and transactional, Frank and Dean proved that genuine friendship, the kind that survives crisis and grows stronger through adversity, is still possible. Their bond wasn't built on shared success or mutual benefit. It was built on trust, loyalty, and the understanding that some things, like protecting the people you care about, matter more than money, fame, or personal safety. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that real friendship means showing up when it matters most, and that the greatest gift you can give someone is your unwavering loyalty when they need it most. Have you ever had to choose between safety and loyalty? Let us know in the comments about the friendships that have defined your life and the moments when you realized who your true friends really are.